Everyone celebrated the Mafia Boss's success, but nobody noticed the woman standing quietly in the shadows who had given up everything to build it. The words were never spoken aloud, yet they described a truth hidden behind the golden walls of Adrian James Whitmore's empire. On a night when hundreds of guests gathered beneath the crystal lights of one of New York's most exclusive ballrooms, the world saw only one thing: a powerful man at the peak of his success. Adrian stood at the center of the room, surrounded by executives, family members, and influential figures who praised his achievements. They spoke about his vision, his discipline, and the empire he had created. Cameras captured his confident expression. Guests raised their glasses to honor his name, but almost nobody looked toward the quiet woman standing near the back of the room. Evelyn Rose Bennett watched the celebration with a gentle smile, holding the same folder she had carried through years of difficult decisions. She was not searching for attention. She never had. For more than 8 years, Evelyn had been the person behind the scenes who made sure Adrian's world never collapsed. She remembered every important meeting. She prepared every detail others overlooked. She stayed late when problems appeared and gave up opportunities in her own life because she believed in the future Adrian was trying to build. She had never asked for a reward. She had never demanded recognition. She simply believed that loyalty meant standing beside someone when the world could not see the effort it required. But success had a strange way of changing how people remembered the past. The same sacrifices that once mattered began to disappear behind Adrian's growing reputation. Across the room, Naomi Grace Carter, Adrian's wife, watched everything with careful eyes. Unlike the people celebrating around her, Naomi noticed the small things. She noticed how Evelyn looked at Adrian with years of memories behind her expression. She noticed how Adrian accepted the praise, but rarely mentioned the people who helped him reach that moment. Naomi was a woman who understood being underestimated. As a curvy black woman in a world that often judged appearances before character, she had learned that quiet strength could be more powerful than public approval. She did not need to compete for attention. She knew her worth. That was why she recognized something others missed. There was a story beneath the celebration, a story about sacrifice, forgotten promises, and a man who had become so focused on protecting his empire that he failed to notice the people who helped create it. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the ballroom became silent, Naomi found Adrian alone in his office. On his desk was an old photograph tucked inside a drawer. It was not a picture of business partners or family events. It was a memory from years ago, from a time when Adrian had almost lost everything before his success began. Naomi looked at the photograph, then at Adrian. She did not accuse him. She did not demand answers. She simply asked one question. Who was she to you before everyone knew your name? Adrian froze for a moment, because for the first time in years, someone had asked about the person who helped him become the man everyone admired. And Adrian realized the woman he had trusted for years might be the person he had forgotten the most. Adrian James Whitmore had spent years believing that memories were something people carried quietly, not something they needed to discuss. He had built a life where every decision had a purpose, every relationship had a role, and every emotion was carefully placed behind a wall of discipline. But after Naomi Grace Carter asked him about the woman who helped him before the world knew his name, Adrian found himself returning to a chapter of his life he had avoided for too long. Years earlier, before the luxury offices and the endless celebrations, Adrian was not the untouchable figure everyone saw today. He was a young man trying to build something from nothing, carrying the pressure of his family expectations and the weight of proving himself. During those uncertain years, Evelyn Rose Bennett became the person who believed in his vision when very few people did. She was not just an assistant managing schedules and documents. She was the person who noticed problems before they appeared. She was the person who stayed when others walked away. She understood Adrian's ambitions, but she also saw the person behind them. Evelyn knew his fears, his doubts, and the moments when he questioned whether success was even possible. She never judged him for those moments. Instead, she reminded him that strength was not about pretending to have every answer. It was about continuing forward even when the path was unclear. As Adrian looked back, he remembered the countless sacrifices Evelyn had made. She had delayed her own plans to help him during the most demanding periods of his career. She had turned down opportunities because she believed the work they were building together would eventually create something meaningful. At the time, Adrian promised that he would never forget what she had done for him. But success slowly changed the way he saw things. The more powerful he became, the easier it was to believe that the achievements around him were simply the result of his own determination. Naomi noticed the silence that followed when Adrian looked at the old photograph. She did not interrupt him. She understood that some truths needed time before they could be spoken. Naomi had spent her own life learning the difference between attention and appreciation. Many people noticed her appearance before they noticed her intelligence, kindness, or strength. As a curvy black woman, she had experienced moments when others underestimated her without knowing her story. But those experiences taught her something valuable. A person did not need everyone's approval to know their worth. That was why she could recognize the pain of being unseen. She mattered, didn't she? Naomi asked softly. Adrian looked away for a moment. He knew the answer immediately. Yes, he finally said. She did. The honesty surprised even him, because for years he had avoided admitting how much Evelyn had contributed to his life. Not because he did not appreciate her, but because acknowledging it meant facing something uncomfortable. He had accepted her sacrifices without truly understanding their cost. That night, Adrian began looking through old records, messages, and memories from the early years of his career. With every detail he uncovered, he saw the same pattern. Evelyn had always been there, not standing in front of him, not demanding recognition, but quietly making sure he had the chance to succeed. And for the first time, Adrian wondered whether the person he had called loyal had actually been the person he had failed the most. Meanwhile, Naomi watched him carefully. She was not searching for a reason to be angry. She was searching for the truth, because she knew something Adrian had forgotten. The people who sacrifice the most are often the ones everyone notices last. Adrian James Whitmore had spent years building an empire that everyone admired, but now he was beginning to see the invisible foundation beneath it. It was not only made of investments, decisions, and strategy. It was made of people. People who believed in him before the world recognized his name. People who gave pieces of their own lives so he could create the future everyone celebrated. And among those people, no one had sacrificed more quietly than Evelyn Rose Bennett. After that night with Naomi Grace Carter, Adrian could not stop thinking about the years he had overlooked. He returned to the old files stored in his private office, searching through documents from the beginning of his career. Every page carried a memory. Every note reminded him of moments when Evelyn had stepped forward without hesitation. She had organized impossible schedules. She had protected important opportunities. She had carried responsibilities that nobody else even noticed. But the most important thing she gave him was not her work. It was her belief. During the years when Adrian doubted himself, Evelyn saw potential in him before he saw it in himself. She reminded him that failure was not the end of the journey. She encouraged him to continue when others questioned his choices. She never asked to stand in the spotlight. She simply wanted the person she believed in to succeed. But Adrian slowly became surrounded by people who only saw the successful version of him. They praised the empire, the wealth, and the influence. They celebrated the results without asking who helped create them. And Adrian allowed that to happen. The realization was uncomfortable, because he understood something he had avoided for years. Forgetting someone's sacrifice was not always done through cruelty. Sometimes it happened through silence. Sometimes it happened because success became so loud that gratitude became too quiet to hear. Naomi noticed the change in him. She saw Adrian spending more time reflecting instead of defending himself. She saw him asking questions he had never asked before. But she also knew that understanding the past was only the first step. A person could recognize a mistake and still choose not to change. One evening, Naomi and Adrian sat together in their home. The conversation was quiet, but the meaning behind it was heavy. "Do you think she expected something from you?" Naomi asked. Adrian looked down before answering. "I do not know." He paused. "Maybe that is the problem. I spent so much time assuming she was fine because she never complained. Naomi looked at him carefully. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who complain the least. Her words stayed with him. Adrian had always admired strength, but he had misunderstood it. He thought strength meant handling everything alone. He was beginning to understand that strength could also mean giving someone the appreciation they deserved. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her life away from the center of Adrian's world. She had not asked Naomi to confront him. She had not tried to make herself the victim. She simply carried the quiet disappointment of someone who realized that years of loyalty could become invisible. Yet Evelyn remained the same person she had always been. Kind, responsible, graceful. That was what made the situation more difficult for Adrian. If she had been angry, he could have defended himself. If she had demanded recognition, he could have explained. But her silence forced him to face the truth without excuses. The woman who had helped build his success never asked for the world. She only deserved to know that someone remembered. And Adrian was finally beginning to understand that the greatest debt was not financial. It was emotional, because some sacrifices cannot be repaid with gifts. They can only be honored through genuine gratitude. Adrian James Whitmore had always believed that the most difficult problems in life were the ones that required strategy, patience, and careful planning. He knew how to handle business challenges. He knew how to negotiate complicated situations. He knew how to protect the empire he had spent years building. But now he faced a different kind of challenge, one that could not be solved with influence or intelligence. He had to face the emotional cost of the people who helped him reach the top. And no truth was harder to accept than the one involving Evelyn Rose Bennett. For years, Evelyn had been a constant presence in Adrian's life. She was there during the uncertain years when success was only a dream. She was there when every decision carried risk, and every mistake could change his future. Yet while Adrian remembered the victories, he had forgotten the sacrifices behind them. He remembered the nights they succeeded, but not the nights Evelyn spent making sure those successes were possible. He remembered the celebrations, but not the quiet moments when she carried responsibilities that belonged to more than one person. The more Adrian looked back, the more he understood how much Evelyn had given without asking for anything in return. Meanwhile, Naomi Grace Carter continued watching Adrian's transformation carefully. She saw the regret in his expression. She saw the way he had started questioning the choices he once accepted without thought. But Naomi also understood something important. Feeling guilty was not the same as changing. A person could regret the past and still repeat the same mistakes if they did not learn from them. One afternoon, Naomi found Adrian reviewing old records again. The room was quiet, filled only with the sound of papers moving across the desk. "You are trying to understand what happened," Naomi said. Adrian looked at her and nodded. "I am trying to understand what I failed to see." Naomi sat beside him. "Then remember this. The people who love you should not have to disappear before you realize their importance." Those words affected him deeply. Adrian had spent years believing that providing opportunities and creating success was the same as showing appreciation. He was beginning to understand that people did not only need results, they needed to know they mattered. At the same time, Evelyn faced her own difficult decision. She had received messages from Adrian asking to speak with her. Part of her wanted to answer immediately, because a part of her still cared about the person she had supported for so long. But another part of her remembered the loneliness of being valued only when she was useful. Evelyn was not angry. She was simply tired of being invisible. She had spent years proving her loyalty. Now she needed to decide whether Adrian could finally recognize her as a person, not just as someone who helped him succeed. When Adrian finally met with Evelyn, he did not arrive with promises or explanations. He did not bring expensive gifts or use his position to make the conversation easier. He came as a man who knew he had something to apologize for. "I thought I appreciated everything you did," Adrian said quietly. "But I realize now that I only appreciated the results. I did not appreciate the sacrifice." Evelyn listened without interruption. She had imagined this moment many times, but hearing those words did not erase the years of feeling forgotten. Still, she noticed something different. Adrian was not defending himself. He was finally admitting the truth. And for the first time, Evelyn saw that the man she once believed in might finally be learning the lesson she had hoped he would understand. Respect was not proven by remembering someone when you needed them. It was proven by valuing them even when nobody was watching. Adrian James Whitmore had spent years believing that recognition could be shown through responsibility, protection, and success. He thought that by building a powerful empire and creating opportunities for the people around him, he was proving his appreciation. But sitting across from Evelyn Rose Bennett, he finally understood the difference between providing something and truly valuing someone. Evelyn had never needed a reward for her sacrifices. She had needed to know that the years she gave were remembered. The conversation between them was quiet, but every word carried the weight of the past. Adrian did not try to explain away his mistakes. He did not talk about how difficult his life had been, or how much pressure he carried. For once, he placed his own struggles aside and focused on the person in front of him. "I should have seen you," Adrian said. "Not just the work you did, not just the problems you solved. I should have seen you." Evelyn looked at him carefully. Those words were meaningful, but they could not instantly erase the years when she felt invisible. She had spent so long being the person everyone depended on that she had forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated without having to prove her value. "I never needed you to repay me," Evelyn replied. "I only wanted to know that I mattered beyond what I could do for you." Adrian lowered his eyes because he knew she was right. The truth was uncomfortable because it revealed something about himself that he had avoided. He had always admired loyalty, but he had not always respected the person offering it. Meanwhile, Naomi Grace Carter watched the situation unfold with a deeper understanding than anyone else. She knew what it felt like to be judged before being known. Throughout her life, people had often focused on her appearance before seeing her intelligence, compassion, and determination. As a curvy black woman, Naomi had learned that society often created expectations about people without understanding their stories. But those experiences gave her a perspective Adrian needed. She understood that Evelyn's pain was not about competition. It was about being forgotten. One evening, Naomi and Adrian had another honest conversation. "Do you know what surprised me the most?" Naomi asked. Adrian looked at her. "What?" "You did not hurt her because you wanted to be cruel. You hurt her because you stopped paying attention." Adrian stayed silent. That realization was harder than any criticism, because it was true. He had spent years focusing on major decisions while ignoring the small moments that showed people they mattered. He had believed that, because he never intended to hurt anyone, he was not responsible for the pain caused by his neglect. Now he understood that intentions were only part of the story. Actions and choices mattered too. In the days that followed, Adrian began making changes that were not designed to impress anyone. He started acknowledging the people who supported him. He began creating space for honest conversations instead of assuming everything was fine. Most importantly, he stopped seeing gratitude as a simple word and started treating it as a daily responsibility. Evelyn noticed the difference, but she remained careful. She had learned that real change was not proven by one apology or one emotional conversation. It was proven through consistency. Adrian knew that earning back trust would take time. He knew that some things could not be repaired quickly. But for the first time, he accepted that patience was part of the process. The man who once believed success was measured by what he built was finally learning that success also depended on how he treated the people who helped him build it. Adrian James Whitmore had spent most of his life believing that people understood him because they respected him. His reputation opened doors. His name carried influence. His decisions shaped the future of everyone connected to his empire. But after facing the truth about Evelyn Rose Bennett and the sacrifices he had overlooked, Adrian began to understand something much deeper. Respect was not created by fear or success. It was created by the way a person treated those who stood beside them when nobody else was watching. For the first time in years, Adrian started changing the way he saw the people around him. He began asking questions, instead of assuming he already knew the answers. He started listening to employees who had spent years supporting his vision. He noticed the quiet efforts that had always existed behind his achievements. These were things he once ignored because they did not appear in reports or public celebrations. Naomi Grace Carter noticed the difference immediately. She did not expect Adrian to become a completely different person overnight. She knew real growth required time. But she saw something that had not existed before. Awareness. Adrian was no longer protecting his image. He was confronting his mistakes. One afternoon, Naomi joined Adrian for a walk through a small garden near their home. Away from business meetings and family expectations, they had a rare moment of peace. "You know what makes this different?" Naomi asked. Adrian looked at her. "What?" "Before, you wanted to fix problems because you did not like losing control. Now you are trying to understand because you care about the people involved." Adrian remained quiet because he knew she was right. For years, he had treated every challenge like something that needed to be solved quickly. He had rarely considered that some situations needed patience instead of solutions. Meanwhile, Evelyn was also experiencing a change in her own life. After years of putting others first, she began focusing on herself. She returned to interests she had abandoned and started making plans based on her own dreams instead of someone else's goals. She still cared about Adrian, but she no longer defined her worth through his success. That was the difference Adrian noticed most. Evelyn was no longer waiting to be recognized. She had recognized herself. When Adrian met with Evelyn again, he expected the conversation to be difficult. Instead, he found a woman who was calm and confident. She was not the person standing in the background hoping someone would notice her anymore. She was someone who understood her own value. "I am happy that you are changing," Evelyn told him. "But I hope you are changing because you finally understand yourself, not because you are afraid of losing people." Adrian thought about those words for a long time. They were not easy to hear, but they were honest. And honesty was something he had learned to appreciate. Later, Adrian faced another challenge. Some members of his family questioned why he was spending so much time reflecting on the past. They believed successful people should only focus on the future. But Adrian realized that ignoring the past was exactly what had created the problem. A person could not build a better future while refusing to learn from the moments that shaped them. For years, Adrian had believed that his greatest achievement was creating an empire. Now he understood that his greatest responsibility was becoming someone worthy of the loyalty he received. Naomi watched him take this difficult path and slowly began to believe that his change was genuine. Not because he made grand promises, not because he tried to impress anyone, but because every day, through small choices, he showed that he finally understood the value of the people who had always been there. The man who once overlooked sacrifice was finally learning how to honor it. Adrian James Whitmore had spent years believing that protecting his empire meant protecting himself. He thought distance created respect, and control created security. But after everything he had learned about Evelyn Bennett and the people who had quietly supported him, he began to understand that a person could have everything the world admired and still lose the things that truly mattered. The greatest change in Adrian was not something people could see in business meetings or public appearances. It was visible in the moments when nobody was watching. He became more thoughtful, more patient, more willing to admit when he was wrong. For a man who had spent decades believing vulnerability was a weakness, this was the hardest transformation of all. Naomi Grace Carter saw this change, but she also knew that growth was tested when life became difficult. It was easy to act differently when everything was calm. The real question was whether Adrian would remain the same person when faced with pressure from those who expected him to return to his old ways. That answer came sooner than he expected. During a private family meeting, Adrian faced questions about his recent decisions. Some relatives believed he was allowing emotions to influence important choices. They believed a person in his position should focus only on reputation and tradition. In the past, Adrian would have agreed without hesitation. He had spent years trying to become the person everyone expected him to be. But this time, he listened quietly before responding. "I spent too long believing that success meant never making mistakes," Adrian said. "But success means nothing if you forget the people who helped you reach it." The room became silent. His words surprised everyone because they were not spoken with anger or pride. They were spoken with honesty. Adrian was no longer trying to prove that he was the strongest person in the room. He was simply telling the truth. Later, Naomi asked him if he was prepared for the consequences of standing by his choices. Adrian understood the question. Changing meant accepting that some people might not understand him. It meant leaving behind the version of himself that had always chosen approval over honesty. For most of my life, I was afraid of losing my position, Adrian admitted. Now I am more afraid of becoming someone who does not deserve the people who believe in me. Naomi listened carefully. That answer showed her something important. Adrian was no longer changing because he wanted to avoid losing someone. He was changing because he finally understood the kind of person he wanted to become. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued moving forward with her own life. She appreciated Adrian's efforts, but she did not depend on them anymore. She had learned a powerful lesson during the years she spent in the background. A person's value does not increase when someone finally notices it. It exists from the beginning. Adrian realized that this was what made Evelyn different. She had never needed his approval to be valuable. She had always carried her own strength. One evening, Adrian invited Evelyn and Naomi to a quiet dinner. It was not a dramatic moment filled with promises. It was a simple conversation between three people who had experienced change in different ways. Adrian thanked Evelyn for the years she had given, not as an employee, but as someone whose kindness had shaped his life. Evelyn accepted his words with calm understanding. She did not need him to rewrite the past. She only needed him to finally acknowledge it. As the evening ended, Adrian looked at the two women who had taught him the most important lessons of his life. One showed him the importance of self-respect. The other showed him the meaning of loyalty. And for the first time, Adrian understood that the greatest people in his life were never the ones standing beside him because of his power. They were the ones who believed in him before he had anything to offer. Adrian James Whitmore had spent years believing that redemption was something a person could achieve through one perfect moment. He once thought that a single apology, a generous action, or a public decision could erase the mistakes of the past. But the more he changed, the more he understood that true redemption was not a moment, it was a journey. It was built through countless choices that showed a person had truly learned. And for Adrian, every choice now carried a deeper meaning. He was no longer trying to repair his image. He was trying to repair the trust he had damaged. Naomi Grace Carter noticed that difference. She saw that Adrian was no longer searching for approval from others. He was finally learning to live according to his own values. The man who once measured success through influence and recognition was beginning to measure it through honesty and the way he treated people. One morning, Adrian visited a community center that had been quietly supported by Evelyn Bennett for years. He had never known the full extent of her involvement because she had never mentioned it. Evelyn had used her own time and resources to help people who needed support, yet she had never looked for attention or praise. Adrian watched as people greeted her with genuine appreciation. They did not know her because of his name. They knew her because of her kindness. In that moment, Adrian understood something important. Evelyn's greatest contribution was never helping him build an empire. It was the compassion she carried into every part of her life. Later that day, Adrian thanked her for something he had never acknowledged before. "You taught me that success is not about how many people know your name," he said. "It is about how many lives become better because you were there." Evelyn smiled quietly. She appreciated the recognition, but she also understood that her journey was no longer connected to whether Adrian saw her value. She had already discovered it herself. Meanwhile, Naomi continued building a stronger connection with Adrian. Their relationship was different from before. It was not based on appearances or expectations. It was based on two people who had learned from painful experiences. Naomi no longer saw Adrian as the powerful man everyone admired. She saw the person who was learning to be honest, even when honesty was uncomfortable. Adrian also learned to appreciate Naomi in a deeper way. He realized that her strength had never come from trying to compete with anyone. Her strength came from knowing who she was. As a curvy black woman who had experienced judgment from people who never took the time to understand her, Naomi had developed a confidence that did not depend on outside approval. She carried herself with dignity because she knew her worth. One evening, Adrian and Naomi sat together discussing the future. There were still challenges ahead. There were still people who questioned their choices. But Adrian no longer feared those opinions the way he once did. "I used to think losing control was the worst thing that could happen," Adrian admitted. "Now I realize the worst thing would have been losing the ability to understand the people who mattered most." Naomi reached for his hand and smiled. It was a simple gesture, but it represented how far they had come. Their story was no longer about mistakes or regrets. It was about growth. It was about two people who discovered that love and respect could survive difficult moments when both sides were willing to learn. Adrian knew he could never change the past. He could not remove the moments when he failed to appreciate the people around him. But he could choose what kind of person he would become from that day forward. And that choice was the one thing no one else could make for him. Adrian James Whitmore once believed that the strongest people were the ones who never showed uncertainty. He believed power came from control, success came from achievement, and respect came from the reputation a person built. But after everything he experienced with Naomi Grace Carter and Evelyn Rose Bennett, Adrian finally understood a truth that had escaped him for most of his life. A person's greatest achievement was not the empire they created. It was the impact they left on the people who stood beside them. Time had changed the way Adrian looked at the world. The same man who once walked into every room expecting others to follow his lead now entered conversations ready to listen. The same man who once overlooked quiet sacrifices now searched for ways to show appreciation. His transformation did not happen because he wanted praise. It happened because he finally understood the cost of taking people for granted. Naomi noticed this more than anyone. She remembered the moment when she first realized Adrian had forgotten the people who helped him succeed. She remembered the disappointment, the questions, and the uncertainty about whether he would ever truly understand. But she also saw the man he was becoming. Not a perfect man, not someone who never made mistakes. A man who accepted responsibility and chose to grow. Their relationship became stronger because it was no longer built on assumptions. It was built on honesty. Naomi never needed Adrian to prove that he had power. She needed him to prove that he had character. And every day, through small actions, he showed her that he finally understood the difference. Evelyn also found peace in her own way. She no longer carried the burden of wondering whether her sacrifices had mattered. She had spent years believing that being needed was the same as being valued. But she learned that her worth had never depended on Adrian's recognition. She was valuable because of who she was, not because of what she had done for someone else. When Adrian thanked her one final time, he did not speak about business achievements or success. He thanked her for believing in him when he had not yet become the person everyone admired. "You gave me support when I had nothing to offer you," Adrian said. "I should have recognized that sooner." Evelyn smiled because she knew the most important part was not the apology, it was the understanding behind it. The past could not be rewritten, but it could be respected. Years later, people would still talk about Adrian's success. They would mention the empire, the decisions, and the influence he created, but the people closest to him remembered something more important. They remembered the moment a powerful man learned humility. They remembered the moment he stopped measuring people by what they could provide and started valuing them for who they were. Naomi stood beside Adrian, not because of his status, but because she saw the person behind it. Evelyn moved forward, not because Adrian finally noticed her, but because she had always known her own worth. Their journeys were different, but they carried the same lesson. The quietest people are often the ones carrying the greatest strength, and the people who give the most are often the ones who deserve to be seen the most. Adrian spent years building something the world could admire, but in the end, the greatest thing he built was not an empire. It was the ability to respect, appreciate, and truly see the people who had always mattered.